It's a claim that has haunted the Leave victory. These spoof posters sprang up in London 2 years after the event. The allegation that Russian money bought victory in the EU referendum. The Cross-Party Intelligence and Security Committee launched an investigation into that and other claims of Russian influence on politics here. They went deep into the intelligence services to get the answers, and to their amazement discovered the cupboard was bare.
The report reveals that no one in government knew if Russia interfered in or sought to influence the referendum because they did not want to know. The UK government have actively avoided looking for evidence that Russia interfered.
We categorically reject that. I think if you look, we've got a long period recognising the enduring and significant threat posed by Russia to the UK.
The committee reports that the intelligence services didn't want to go anywhere near that kind of investigation, worried that it might look like they were dabbling in politics. Ministers could have instructed them to investigate, but nothing like that actually happened. Contrast with America, where, when allegations of Russian interference in the US presidential elections 4 years ago happened, they were quickly investigated and reported on. Here, by comparison, the rumours first surfaced of Russian involvement in politics in the Scottish referendum 6 years ago. But since then, nothing's happened.
So the question is who is protecting the British public from interference in our democratic process? Well, in a nutshell, we found no one is.
Just as the committee were publishing their report, the government published its response. Some of the committee convinced that timing was a snub. And in that response, the government says there's no need for a look back on what happened in the EU referendum because, it says, we have seen no evidence of successful interference in the EU referendum.
The government cannot say there's nothing to see if they haven't asked to see what's there.
Well, that's what they've just done.
They may have done it today. The public won't buy it.
The Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage tweeted triumphantly, "There's no evidence of Russian involvement with Leave.eu or me in the referendum. It was all a hoax. Apologies are now required."
Well, that's not true, because no one's looked. That's the fundamental point. So no, I'm sorry, that's just nonsense.
Nothing propinquous like propinquity.
The Prime Minister hosted the first face-to-face meeting of Cabinet for 4 months. It was held in the Foreign Office to help ministers keep their distance. The committee accused the government of lying repeatedly in its arguments for not publishing their report, first handed over to Number 10 last October.
This committee has been subjected to unprecedented delay and dislocation. This really must never happen again.
The report also talks of Russian cyber attacks and influence now flowing through all veins of British public life, including the House of Lords. It describes London as a laundromat for illicit Russian money. Moscow dismissed the claims, but deep down may relish today's headlines.
We have seen on the one hand the official spokesperson from the Foreign Ministry saying this is just a Russophobic tissue of lies, because after all there isn't much evidence behind it that's been presented in its redacted version. And at the same time, you've also got, particularly in social media and so forth in Russia, a degree of satisfaction that this has shown that they are still a great superpower, even if it's a superpower of mayhem and malign influence.
The Intelligence Committee couldn't produce specific claims to fire up their demands for an investigation into Russian political interference. He's hoping that helps him make sure no such thing ever happens.
Well, Dominic Grieve was chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee when the report was written, and he joins me now. If you weren't able to see evidence of Russian interference because nobody ever asked the security services to look for it, how do you know there's anything to look for?
I can't answer that question. What I can say is my own committee can't carry out that investigation. The question is, has there been an inquiry into the possibility of Russian interference in the 2016 referendum? And what are its conclusions? Well, the answer is there's been no such inquiry. So in those circumstances, we can't draw a conclusion one way or the other. Do bear in mind, this inquiry wasn't just about the 2016 referendum or indeed interference in electoral processes generally. It was about Russia's threat to the United Kingdom in its widest sense, of which there is plenty of evidence, which we were able to put into our report, ranging from commission of murder in the United Kingdom to interference with the internet and destructive interference as well as hacking. So all those things are there, but on that specific issue, we were surprised to note that there had been no investigation. And indeed, on the face of it, there had been no special measures taken at the time of the referendum to try to make sure that no such interference took place.
Well, I mean, Downing Street have dismissed an awful lot of the findings in the report already. You know, do you accept that they are acting with the nation's best interests when they respond to your reports?
They should be acting in the nation's best interest, but I can't escape the fact that they suppressed this report for 9 months for reasons which were completely and totally invalid and gave a series of explanations as to why they'd done it, which were untrue. So that does worry me. I've expressed my mystification in the past as to why they've behaved in this fashion, and I don't know the answer. But it should be a matter of concern that a government behaves like that towards a cross-party committee, which, if I may say so, included people of different political views, including over the question of leaving or remaining in the EU. That's a complete red herring. We're there to try to make sure that the UK remains secure, including our democratic processes, which is the right of people to determine, without interference by subversion from abroad, whether they want or don't want something, including political parties or staying or leaving the EU.
But in the press conference today, and in a lot of the sort of discussion around this, there has been the assumption that Russia is trying to interfere in our democratic processes and did, therefore must have done, with regard to Brexit. Is that an assumption that you go along with? Because we know that things happened in America, the suspicion is things happened over the Scottish referendum, and therefore there's no reason to think that they wouldn't have tried to influence Brexit.
Well, the government has just confirmed it, and I should make clear, we haven't been able to investigate it. I'm no longer the chair of the committee, but it's the government's own view that that happened over the 2019 general election. The evidence of Russian doing this against other states is very well established. But I agree, it's possible it didn't happen in certain contexts in the UK. But as I say, without an inquiry into whether it happened or not, we can't answer that question.
So why do you think it wasn't
happening?
happening?
Russia clearly poses a threat in a number of ways. That should matter.
I mean,
Sorry.
Why do you think both the intelligence services didn't look themselves and politicians didn't direct them to look at this specifically? I mean,
I think if you look at our report, we make quite clear that the idea of interference by using the internet in democratic processes like referendums was not thought about at the time of the 26 referendum. So to that extent, I think the eye was off the ball. People hadn't focused on it. They were looking at other priorities. Subsequently, when the evidence emerged, particularly after the American elections, then in those circumstances, I think it should have been a priority to review what had happened, and that has not occurred. And as I say, it hasn't occurred possibly because there's a delicacy on the part of the agencies, which is something I rather respect about not getting embroiled in domestic political events. But at the same time, on a cross-party basis, the UK government and the opposition parties should be very concerned about this and should have looked into it.
Just briefly,
asked for it to be looked into.
You did also mention the Russian money that's in Britain now and all the oligarchs that have been welcomed over the years and the networks that surround them. Are you basically saying that there are a load of Russian agents living in Britain right now, thriving?
We are undoubtedly saying that there are Russians living in the United Kingdom today who have a great deal of money, who will be using that money in order to further the aims of the Putin regime, on whom they are ultimately entirely dependent if they are to survive economically, unless they have entirely broken their ties with Russia itself.
Dominic Grieve, thank you very much.
Well, today's Russia report has coincided with a separate investigation by other MPs which says the government must urgently bring in new laws to deal with misleading and harmful content online. Our political correspondent Liz Bates is in the newsroom. Liz.
Yes, so the Culture Committee has looked into this problem of misinformation online before. Now, what's interesting, given everything that's gone on today, is that they've previously raised concerns when they've looked at this around Russian interference with UK elections via social media. Now, that's an ongoing concern for this committee. Today, though, they have focused solely on the last few months and the role of misinformation during COVID-19. Now, this ranges from things like 5G conspiracy theories, as many people will have seen and heard about, through to false reports of hospitals being overcrowded and unsafe, reports that have at times prevented people from going to hospitals, even when they've been very unwell. Now, the committee also looked into the future harms that this problem could cause. So, for example, they think that people who might have read a lot of misinformation online could then refuse a COVID-19 vaccine when one is eventually offered. Now, given all of this, given the findings of this report, the committee has been very critical of the government. They have said that they've raised this issue with them many times in many different contexts and that they simply haven't acted quickly enough to tackle it. Has the government been dragging its feet on this issue?
Yes, I think it has. I mean, they said just a few months ago that they were minded to make Ofcom a online harms regulator. Well, just make them the regulator. Everyone knows it's going to happen, even Ofcom themselves preparing for it. So this is just further delay. And we've been promised a world-leading architecture for social media regulation, something that basically will be held as an example in all the other Western countries. Well, we haven't got there yet, have we? And we're seeing other countries beginning to actually steal a march on us in that respect. So we need to get a move on here.
Now, they've also levelled a lot of criticism at the social media firms, the big tech companies themselves. They say not only have they allowed a lot of this stuff to spread, but they have also at times profited from its proliferation. Now, we have approached some of those big companies, Twitter and Facebook, to come on the programme to talk about this issue, to explain what they've been doing to tackle it. Instead, they've sent us statements. They say that they have invested heavily in addressing misinformation online. They say they've worked with governments and that every day they remove huge amounts of misinformation from their sites.